Hi everybody, Mature Simmer here. So welcome back to another episode of the Non-Aviator Flight Sim series. I'm going ahead here for folks who maybe are less comfortable with aircraft and so forth, but want to enjoy the flight simulation hobby, helping you figure out how to do that by putting a bunch of short videos on pretty much every topic I can think of that might be helpful for you to know. And so I've been doing the aspects of flight. So we've got taxiing, takeoff, climb, cruise, descent, which is this video, and then landing is what we've got left. We're here at cruise altitude. We're heading into an airport, and we're in a Cessna CJ4. So this isn't information about the aircraft per se, but it's enough for you to understand. Because I'm using autopilot, because the autopilot has the ability to vertically control the aircraft, it will calculate what's called a top of descent, which is what TOD is when you're looking on things. And so if you're flying an aircraft like this and you have everything set up in your flight computer properly, so I had to go ahead and put in a altitude I want to be at this waypoint at Hukov, which is about 7 or 8 miles from the airport. And so it has calculated that in about 12.5 miles that the aircraft should be descending, and you can see we're under 90 miles from Birmingham is where we're headed at this point. At this point the aircraft will do that, but you can manually do things with things like V-speed and so forth. Again, I will have videos on autopilot and the things you need to know with that as a non-aviator to be able to use them and not be afraid of them, and try to explain in a little bit more layman's terms what things do and so forth. But this is showing you also the dot that's on there is kind of showing what likely I think the descent angle will be. So that's what we're starting to see, but you'll notice when it gets here, this will start to flash, and then we'll start to descend and head down toward the airport. But in descent, you're basically preparing for a couple things as you're getting ready for descent, which is why I started the video ahead of time. As soon as you start descending, obviously gravity is going to start pulling you down. You're going to start speeding up. I'm really close to the red line here. That means I'm going to have to lower the power on the aircraft pretty quickly. Otherwise, I get into a dangerous situation where I'm overspeeding the aircraft. And I don't want to do that because, in a real aircraft, but obviously what we're trying to mimic in a flight simulator is that as well, I would cause potential damage, potentially catastrophic damage to my aircraft. So I need to, be careful. Now you can see top of descent is flashing, V-path is flashing, and we are starting to descend, and immediately we're starting to accelerate. So I am slowing down my engines. You don't have to go crazy with it. And on the Cessna, I'm just watching that my airspeed is going down, and you can see it went down to about 2,100 feet per minute is what we're descending. Again, in this case, the flight computer will figure it out. There's some rules of thumb you can use as well. So typically your descent speed will be basically a magnitude of 3. So if you need to go down however many thousand feet you need, let's say you need to go down 10,000 feet, you'd multiply that by 3, 10 times 3, and basically you need 30 miles to descend that far. And so that's why at this point you can see we're at about 70. We're coming from 25,000. I need to get to 3,000. So that's where it's determining that I need that level of descent to get to 3,000 before I get 60 miles or so. And that was about 22,000 feet that we need to go down. So you can see we've already descended 3,000 feet. So the other thing you're going to need to keep aware of, I'm not sure I mentioned this in my climb piece because I was really going to talk about it more with flight planning and so forth, but when you cross through 18,000 feet in the US, that is the transition altitude, where basically you go from an altitude below that that's kind of measured by barometric pressure specifically, to standard barometric pressure, which is where we're set right now, and you can see it's STD for standard, and it's 29.92 at the barometric pressure level. Once we go below 18,000, because that is the transition altitude in the US, in Europe it's different, and in different areas of Europe it can vary, but it can be 6,000, 8,000, 10,000 I've seen sometimes. So, as you're doing your planning and as you're trying to figure out where you're flying, all of those things are things you need to think about, which again is where flight simming can be complicated, and it is. But it is manageable if you just do it in chunks, which is why I've decided to present the information that way, so that you can consume it a chunk at a time and not be overwhelmed with a really long video that covers everything. But, we're going to Birmingham, and so in this plane we can adjust this ahead of time, so 300.05. I'm not going to explain how I'm getting that, but that's the barometric pressure that we need our altimeter set at once we transition below the altitude. And you'll see when we hit 18,000, this will start blinking. So this is obviously a part of descent. So now I just push that, and now you can see the pressure we're at is that, and that does adjust the altitude that the plane thinks it's at. But you have enough time to react basically from 18,000 feet down, because most of the US is well below that. Even if you're landing in the mountains, you probably still have 5,000 or 6,000 feet to the ground level. You need to do that in descent as well. But then if you don't have a computer that's calculating your descent as you're coming in, you're going to need to figure out when to start descending. And so that 3 is a good example. So again, if I'm coming from 30,000 feet and I'm landing basically at sea level, so I'm going to descend 30,000 feet, sometime before 90 nautical miles, I want to start descending. So, because it's just basically the altitude, divided by 1,000 times 3 is the way, a kind of a back of the napkin type of calculation that you can use as a pilot. And some of that, airspeed has to do with things. So now as we're descending again in the US, we have to be below 250 knots at or below 10,000 feet. So I'm going to start slowing down as well, because that is something we need to accommodate for, and it takes a little while to slow down. You can use speed brakes, which is what this lever is here in the Cessna, which basically throws some flaps up on the wing and increases the drag of the plane. But obviously if you can avoid doing that, and I think there is some speeds that it's unsafe to do that at, this may be those speeds. I tend to try to plan ahead and avoid having to use speed brakes, but on airliners and things I think it's a little bit more common, but you can usually still manage it appropriately if you plan. So now we're actually below speed, so I can speed up a little bit, because there's again no reason to go too slow, and I probably could have started slowing down later. You saw it took we lost about 2,000 feet of elevation in the time it took me to slow down based on what I had done. But this is why it's important. I'm trying to mention this at some point in every video. Your goal, as you're working through Flight Sim, get very familiar with your aircraft. Get very familiar with how it functions, what you need to do, where controls are. I didn't mean to touch that there. I'm trying to speed up the engines a little bit again. So again, like I think I'm sitting on that button and it thinks it's pressing it. So basically I'm looking at my engine speed here, and then now I'm looking at my airspeed, so you can see I'm speeding up a little bit. So I probably put too much power in. So you're playing a little bit of a game when the autopilot doesn't control the throttle. But just plan ahead so that you're not having an issue. The other thing you're going to want to do in aircraft in U.S. airspace is you're going to want your landing lights on below 10,000 feet. So just, again, know where they are. Sometimes it's a switch in the overhead. Sometimes it's a button like this. You just need to learn your aircraft. And so that is where it's helpful. And so, some of these videos give you just that piece. Like I have flown the CJ4 a lot. I know where the things I need to know are. I cannot tell you what every button in this plane does because they're not needed for effectively flying the plane and doing it in a way that would make it acceptable in in something like VATSIM even or whatever. But again, we're not getting into those aspects. Those will be subsequent videos if or those will be separate videos when I choose to cover those topics. If there's a topic you want me to cover as we're sitting here waiting and descending, if there is a topic you want me to cover that I haven't and you'd like me to do it sooner rather than later, give me a comment. Let me know. There's nothing magic about how I'm covering topics. I'm just covering them in individual videos. They're not in sequence on purpose because things will change. But those are the things you need to understand for descent. We're going to get into landing in another video, but at this point, any questions, comments, include those in the comments down below. I'll answer them as quickly as I can. If you've enjoyed this video, haven't dropped a like, please consider doing that. I greatly appreciate it. It helps with the reach of the channel, and the YouTube algorithm likes knowing that people are engaging with the videos. If you're not a subscriber of the channel, it'll help you see things, and especially if you're enjoying this series, it's just going to be a little bit easier between subscribing and marking notifications that you'll get told when new things appear on the channel, and that way you won't miss anything when something comes up that you might want to partake in. And with that, I will see you next time.